Hello everyone, thank you and welcome for joining us for today's webinar. Let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Heman and I am a research associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. I am pleased to moderate this webinar as SARIM believes that everyone is equal regardless of caste, creed, religion and color as long as they are human beings. After all religion teaches us liberty, equality and fraternity. However, SARIM finds ways to protect minorities against systematic discrimination and social injustice in South Asia. They examined issues such as challenges of integrating minorities, their dedication in mainstream media, and the decline of equal opportunities. In the wake of hatred and violence, SARIM arose as an organization with a mission and slogan of defending the rights of South Asian minorities. Today we are talking about the vibrant social media and the incessant victimization of South Asia minorities. South Asia has experienced a heightened incidence of hate speech and incitement of hatred, with given consequences for minorities such as religious, caste-based related issues and the human rights issues. Majority group across the region have historically attempted to persecute and reinforce stereotype and prejudice against the minorities through the unregistered use of hateful rhetoric. In particular, new opportunities provided by the digital technology such as television and social media platforms have expertly leveraged to this end. These are often the campaigns that encourage or justify the discrimination, hostility, and violence against minorities. As social media have come to dominate socio-political landscape in almost every corner of the world, new and old victimization practices increasingly take place on these platforms. Moving forward, we have the fantastic series of the speaker from Pakistan, United Kingdom, USA, and India and Bangladesh. I would like to introduce this wonderful series of speakers to participate. Our speakers are Dr. Anila Malik from Pakistan, Mabrur Ahmed from UK, Bikash from Bangladesh, and Anubhav Singh from USA. And last speaker is Lacey Martin from India. Our first speaker is Dr. Anila Malik. She is working as a professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Karachi. Welcome to the webinar. Please, Dr. Anila, take a moment and present your views.
The people are not playing sensibly for those issues which are related to them also. And unfortunately, this issue in which we are observing that the victimization is more profound, and this profound kind of element, specifically with reference to the minority, is showing a gravity. I personally feel that whenever we are living in a society, whether we are belonging to one particular sect, ethnic group, cultural group, or any other kind of geographical boundaries, or we are living as a majority or as a minority, I personally feel that we need to show a mature kind of attitude for everyone. Whether they are a minority or whether either they are majority. Because when we are living at one place, it means that we need to acclimatize with the culture. So I believe that most of the minorities are already acclimatized with the culture and they are one of us. So there is no need to discriminate, there is no need to have prejudice or some kind of a stereotype, because they are living in your country or in my country. So they are among us. So the categorization which we have regarding the we need to stop all those kind of elements. For example, sometime we are talking about the in-group and consider them as an out-group. But as a Pakistani, as a person who is living in Pakistan, I personally believe that everyone is same, have equal rights for everything. Number one. Number two, another thing is that when we feel that we have certain issues, we have certain people, we have certain groups who are consistently showing different kind of attitude or unusual kind of attitude with reference to minority. The psychosocial impact over those minority is growing intense day by day. People are showing fear, isolation, or showing maladjustment, trying to switch from this place to another place, and they are feeling insecure. The recent event which we have in the area of Punjab, that was very threatening for everyone, including myself. Definitely minority feel threatened, but the majority also feel threatened because this is not a common routine of Pakistan. It is an unusual event and we all are very feeling very insecure. So we need to stop this kind of thing by adjusting those people with us, among us. And we need to recategorize the boundaries. Recategorize the boundaries means that we need to recategorize the cognitive boundaries. Like for example, if I feel that these are the people who are in group and these are the people who are in the out group, we need to switch this kind of cognitive thinking. We need to change this kind of mental set. So when we are changing the mental set, definitely it has a great impact over the attitude of the people. So the cognitive restructuring is essential for everyone. And we are living at one place, we have equal rights, we have a positive kind of socialization and the interaction. And everyone is basically practicing their own beliefs. So people are not supposed to interfere in other beliefs. So this is my perspective that we need to work on the acclimatization of the people, or what we say that we need to have an inclusive kind of society. So the inclusive society always reflect a less kind of discrimination, a lesser kind of prejudice, a lesser kind. I'm not saying that we need to have an ideal society because it is not possible. The real society always have some symbolic relation like love, liking, empathy, and the other society in which we have a conflict, the other side of the society in which we have a conflicting kind of area also. So sometimes it happens that we have some positive relationship and sometimes we have some conflicting relationship also. And we need to accept those disagreement. We need to accept those argument also. So this is my perspective, and maybe I will contribute more after hearing other people's view too.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Anila, for taking time and sharing your remarks. Thank you very much. And now I would like to turn it over to Faiqa, my co-host, to welcome our next speaker.
This is Faiqa Lakho, Research Associate at South Asia Research Institute for Minorities. Once again, I welcome you all. To proceed further, I would like to invite our second speaker. He is from Bangladesh. Mr. Bikash Das is Dalit Activist and is currently serving as Head of Right and Humanitarian Response. We are very delighted to have you in our panel, Mr. Bikash. The floor is all yours.
However, what I want to say that I am very much happy to be here, and I would like to thank this research institution for inviting me this webinar. And you know, as I belong in minority community, I am working as a rights and humanitarians program at southwest part of Bangladesh. And you know, according to our constitution, there is no discrimination based on caste, religions, and gender, class, etc. But still now, how do we say, in society, though our constitution's main pillars is the secularism, but still there is 9 point something % minority community living in Bangladesh, but they are sometimes they are very much afraid being a minority that the peoples also who are non-minority, they are trying to uh, bullying or physically and mentally hitting to those minority peoples. So few months back, you have to see that on social media that in Kumilla, during the worship of Hindu community, Hindu religions, there are some um, peoples who are trying to vandalize the deity, and also there is a two minority men also killed by them. So this is how the minority peoples in Bangladesh also living with fear, and this in this context it is really hard to uh, minority peoples that some minority peoples are trying to cross the border sometimes, because the southwest part also the very nearest to India border. This is all from my side, but one things I would like to share, that the social media, yes, now in Facebook also there is some rumor sometimes also circulating by uh, non minority peoples or majority peoples that uh, some rumor that if you want to live here, your vote for me. If you want to go nearest country, your land for me. So how we cannot explain that how the minority peoples are uh, survive with this situation, but our government of Bangladesh also trying hard to solve to address such violence against minority. So thank you again, and I will share more if I get chance again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bikash, for sharing very insightful views. Moving forward, I would like to invite our third speaker, Mr. Mabrur Ahmed. Mabrur is from London, United Kingdom, and currently working as director of Restless, being an international human rights organization. Besides, he is a senior researcher having command on the topics including Rohingya refugees, street children in Bangladesh, and Assam NRC. We are very happy to have you with us. Over to you, Mr. Mabrur.
Thank you very much, Faiqa, and thank you to everyone else as well. I'll give you my brief overview of some of my thoughts, and hopefully there'll be some opportunity for some questions at the end as well. So obviously the title of the topic is really looking at the victimization of minorities in South Asia, especially the use of social media as well. But I think the thing that I want to focus on the most is it's almost like a cycle of victimization. So again and again, we see a victimization of minorities. And a lot of this has got to do with, I believe anyway, the not just the way that the whole of the subcontinent was left after the British period, after the era of colonialism, but also possibly something which is built in further beyond that as well, beyond that in history as well. I think most of the times when we're looking at whether you're talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, or any of these countries, we are looking at essentially Westphalian states, nation states that are built upon a model of trying to establish a majoritarian society. Wherever you are trying to establish a majoritarian society, of course, that leaves on the other side of the scale the potential for, as we've seen, not just in theory, but in practice, of communalism, and therefore the ugly side of what society can be when we are trying to fracture a society along the lines of some sort of majoritarianism. So whether we're looking at India right now, and whether we look at the NRC in Assam, or again, even if you want to look at the way that the state is treating its farmers from Punjab. Most of this is along the idea and along the lines of how a society, i.e. India in this particular case, is billing itself as a Hindu Rashtra, as a place which is trying to establish a country along religious lines. And similarly, if you look at the establishment of Pakistan, West and East, that was built along a similar religious fault line. Now, the problem with any sort of fault line that you try and create is that, of course, there's going to be people who are outside of that fault line. So as we saw in the case of West Pakistan, East Pakistan, although there was some sort of similarity along the religious lines, there was a massive discrepancy along linguistic lines. Whether we look at, even when we look at Pakistan in a bit more detail, you look at, mainstream Pakistan, if you like, and then you look at Balochistan, and you see that there alone, there is a fault line. And the whole problem of where I see South Asia at this moment in time, and its incessant victimization of minorities, is that we're constantly looking at trying to establish a majority type of state. And like I said, this all comes down to the inspired Westphalian state system, a system of a state which actually doesn't look or doesn't appreciate any differences, but only looks along trying to establish along mainstream lines, along one sort of cleavage or the other, whether that's religious, linguistic, cultural, etc., etc. And even within Bangladesh, for example, you'll see that the people of the Chittagong Hill tracts, who often find themselves speaking a slightly different language, with a very different religious outlook, very different cultural outlook, they are rejected from the mainstream of Bangladeshi society, politically, religiously, economically. And this is, like I said, incessant in the way that South Asian nations have been set up. So really, in order to try to find some sort of alternative narrative or some sort of alternative future, first and foremost, we have to look at the way that our states are set up and really question whether or not those states are set up, or do they garner positive reinforcement, do they garner inclusivity, do they garner a sense of a community as well, because for the most part they don't. And we've seen this violently in the case of the Rohingya as an example. They have essentially been disregarded from society in Burma in the most emphatically violent ways, such as genocide that they've seen coming their way. When we look at India again, we see the same sort of rhetoric being used. I don't know if many of you saw last week, there were many videos emerging of almost a kind of Hitler-esque, Nazi-esque ideology of Hindustan being for Hindi speakers and for Hindu people only. And the same applies when you look at, for example, Kashmir and its fault lines, about how Pakistan and India have essentially tried to, over many, many years, over the last 6 decades, try to claim the territory as their own, despite the people's will. And I think when we're looking at South Asia and when we're looking at minorities, the very first thing to do is to recognize that all of us, whether we're from a society of mainstreamism, majoritarianism, or whether we're from a minority background, we all make up that particular state or that particular country or that particular city or that particular community. And until and unless we all have even ground, then we will not be able to find common ground and to find some degree of peace. When you talk about social media and when we look at the influence of social media in the past sort of decade and a half, then we're really looking at a platform whereby unaccounted for opinions are given a platform. So people from very ordinary backgrounds, whether that means that they have been growing up with ideas of hatred or growing up with ideas of love and acceptance, they find themselves on an even keel. And the way that society has been set up for the past sort of 2 centuries or so is that we rely upon public figures to apply some sort of decorum in the way that they speak. And therefore, what you try and get normally is a fairly evenly balanced society. And even that, despite then, like I said, it's not like the world has not seen violence in its history. But the way that average ordinary person is now allowed or given the platform and the scope to portray somewhat misskewed opinions, really doesn't bode well for the future, because, you know, obviously, as we have seen in the past, a majoritarian type of state is normally very heavily backed by the state. So in the case of India right now, if you look at the voices of combination against minority backgrounds, Muslim backgrounds, Christian backgrounds, Sikh backgrounds, you'll see that the amount of investment and the amount of infrastructure that supports populist agenda voices of those individuals on social media pushing a far right agenda will be more heavily backed than those who are trying to call for an even balance. And that's unfortunately where the new world of somewhat assumed individualism in social media combines with state machinery, combines with advances in the way that social media optically appears to be. And that's, you know, like what I'm trying to say, essentially, perhaps I'm losing my audience, but what I'm trying to say is that a state, be that the US, be that the China, be that India, be that Pakistan, Bangladesh, or whoever it might be, they may appear to be quite balanced, but behind the scenes, because of the world that we live in, because of the security, social media security, internet security that we live in, most of these firewalls that we assume to exist to block out hate speech are actually set up by the state themselves. So we've seen in many times before, for example, in the US elections when Trump succeeded, there was actually a large movement, there was a large data breach whereby voters were rigged with certain messages appearing in front of them and skewing their populism even further. And the same applies in India. You know, even if you look at the way that traditional media and social media now combine together, if you watch something like NDTV, or for that matter, any other TV station which is backed by a political party across South Asia or any part of the world, it's very, very cataclysmic. It's very, very urgent. It's very, very disturbing on a mental health perspective to be able to acquire news in an impartial way. There is no impartiality anymore. When that combines with social media, the two things become very dangerous because we move further and further away from each other to more and more poles, further poles apart from each other. And that is essentially what populism is anyway. And the only people that really benefit of this are those from a political elite background who are able to maneuver society so that they can grab power. And the ones who lose out is actually everyone. It's not just the minorities who lose out. It's everyone who loses out, because what happens is the somewhat mainstream that you have within society are now driven to extreme opinions through, like I said, traditional media and social media combining together, which drives our poles apart. The minority community definitely suffer because they are victimized, but then also the majoritarian community are also troubled by the fact that their opinions are being wildly skewed away from what they probably would have been because of this combination of state-backed traditional media and state-allowed infrastructure for populist opinions on social media. And so therefore, my closing remark, I suppose, is essentially the future of minorities in South Asia, or for that matter, across any part of the world, is looking increasingly troubled, simply because not only are we set up from our state perspective, our nation state systems, that we will victimize minorities, but also now, given this new world of social media and state-backed media combining together, even the minority community will find themselves on populist sides of the agenda. I'll stop there, and hopefully there'll be some questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mabrur, for your valuable contribution to our webinar and for your valuable time. Over to you, Heman.
Thank you, Faiqa. Our next speaker is Mr. Anubhav Singh. Welcome to the webinar. Let me introduce him. He's a Dalit activist and a thinker based in Boston, USA. He has studied at the Fletcher School of International Affairs, Tufts University, and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, where he focused on political economy of South Asia and the Middle East countries. Earlier, he worked under the Professor Aisha Jalal on the political economy caste movement in India and on caste Hindutva politicians. Now I would like to invite Mr. Anubhav Singh. Thank you very much for joining us today. Over to you, Mr. Singh.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Heman, and also thank you, Mr. Mabrur, for a very pertinent point about the Westphalian state system. And indeed, I would say that all the entire South Asia and its minorities are bearing the brunt of the colonial system of looking at each other through a blanket system of artificially constructed identities. And if I were to talk of the health of Indian democracy in 2020, then the frequent incidences of rising intolerance against Indian minorities and the hollowing out of India's democratic institutions do demonstrate that India as a democracy has now arrived at a perilous conjuncture, where sadly, the Indian state has played a very active role in subduing and oppressing its most marginalized citizens. The political scientist Christopher Jaffelott has termed it as a strategy of legalism and vigilantism. That is where the state has used its legal and institutional instruments against any form of dissent by its religious minorities, and also has provided tacit support to vigilante groups who have run amok and have been dispensing a sort of mob justice for either eating beef or interreligious or intercaste marriages, relationships, and for recently, as you would have seen, for even offering namaz in public. So indeed, as boundaries continue to blur between India's ruling party and that of the Indian state, social media in India has proved to be a sort of a very effective tool in furthering this agenda, not through the state's own IT cells, but also by various influential accounts who have often gone on to construct a sort of a majoritarian nationalist narrative to prevent any sort of criticism of the Indian government, the Indian state, or to even hinder any sort of self-reflection by Indian society. Indeed, I would argue that the agenda is nothing but rather the construction and the reinforcement of a traditional sort of a Brahminical system where the affluent upper castes are best placed to avail opportunities provided by this social and economic ghettoization of India's minorities, along with this neoliberal paradigm of development. John Drays has aptly termed it as a revolt of the upper castes against Indian democracy. I would add to Drays, and I would say that underlying this imposition of what we call this Brahminical system is also a sort of a perverse system of patriarchy, where bodies of women across Dalit and Muslim communities have been used time and again to stamp on the psyche of these communities that they are nothing but second-class citizens in a democratic and in an ostensibly democratic and secular state. And Muslim women online, Dalit women online have borne the brunt time and again of such verbal attacks for asserting themselves online, questioning the system, or raising their voice against any sort of injustice which is happening across India. I mean, if a reading of the recent Oxfam report on social media vis-a-vis India in tandem with another CSDS survey reveals that not only do upper castes in India dominate the use of social media and are likely to have almost twice as much exposure as to social media as compared to Dalits and Adivasis, but they're also the people who frequently harbor the idea that India belongs to only Hindus. When you interpret these results in the light of a Pew survey, which was conducted in 2017, in which over 53% of respondents in India expressed their support for an autocratic system or martial law, the future of Indian democracy indeed looks bleak. It is quite evident and well known that India's mainstream media has almost no representation from its Dalits, its Adivasis, and its Muslims. And the social media has of late functioned as nothing but a mere extension of this upper caste dominated newsroom, where the same people time and again have emerged as influencers and agenda setters on social media as well. So consequently, and frequently you would hear terms like love jihad, corona jihad, anti-national, land jihad, reservations, merit, which have come to dominate the discourse on social media and used to target India's minorities, its Muslims, its Dalits. Not only in India has social media been used to mobilize public opinion along communal lines, various accounts, meme pages, and even comedy have been used to peddle familiar, though grossly inadequate tropes about merit, affirmative action, reservations, the ideas of purity and pollution, while sort of promoting and legitimizing caste discrimination. And indeed, social media has proven to be a very effective tool for legitimizing and consolidating the colonial construct of a uniform Hindu identity and extolling the virtues of the Varna system while demonizing India's minorities and disseminating false historical narratives about temple destruction in medieval India, the contribution of Muslim culture to India, our constitutional debates about minority rights, reservations, and principles like secularism enshrined in our constitution. We would have expected some sort of pushback against this perpetration of online hate. But sadly, India's major opposition party, the Indian National Congress, seems to have taken a leaf out of the BJP's book, where even its own supporters have often indulged in identity-based attacks on those who question the Congress's use of soft Hindutva as a strategy to counter BJP. And they display sort of convenient amnesia about the Congress's own communal past. And literally the same can be said of the Aam Aadmi Party, which probably has the most organized social media presence after the BJP. However, India's ruling party has been far more successful in its use of social media in furthering its narrative, given its unmatched money and muscle power. The passage of the recent electoral reforms bill, which resulted in the passage of the electoral bonds, has resulted in almost complete opaqueness about election finance in India, and it is estimated by the Association for Democratic Reforms that almost 80% of such bonds bring funding to the BJP. And consequently, the BJP and its associated pages also happen to be the largest spender on political advertisements on social media, as is revealed by data from the Facebook ad tracker, which has been published a few years back in the Indian Express. Indeed, in the past 3 years, the Indian government has gone on to spend around 1,700 crore on social media for advertising purposes, as reported by the Hindustan Times. This obviously creates a sort of conflict of interest when it comes to the business model of social media giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Google, who have often been accused of not doing enough to curb hate speech against minorities on their platform. As a matter of fact, Facebook's former head of public policy in India was accused of inaction against hate speech and disinformation because India was considered a very important market for Facebook. Facebook for long has kept its moderation guidelines a secret and was recently forced to reveal them in the aftermath of the Guardians publishing those guidelines. And the revelations by the Observer that data from millions of Facebook accounts had been hacked by a political consultancy firm. In 2020, Facebook agreed to pay almost $52 million to its content moderators in America for having developed post-traumatic stress disorder on the job. They were overworked, underpaid, and provided little to no therapy support for content moderation where constant exposure to hate speech took its toll on their mental health. In a country like India, or indeed across a diverse region as South Asia, with its constantly weakening labor laws, the working conditions of Facebook's moderators would be anybody's guess. And how representative the moderator body would be of South Asia's minorities, of its Muslims, its Dalits, its women, and other religious minorities which are subject to constant hate. While Facebook and social media giants do have had indeed an important, have played an important role as far as subverting democracy across the world is concerned, the Indian state has only tightened its hold on social media by doing away with the protection for intermediary liability clause, which now allows the government to hold social media platforms responsible for the content their users post online. Along with the use of software, or rather the alleged use of software like Pegasus in targeting opponents and dissidents, and the use of the Aadhaar database for election campaigning by the BJP and other political parties, it is questionable if the current or subsequent central and state governments and other political parties would be willing to check the proliferation of hate on social media, and how effective any controls or measures would be if introduced for such purpose. In the end, I'd conclude with three well-known warnings by Baba Sahib Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar in his speech to the Constituent Assembly on November 25th, 1949, which captures the decay across democratic institutions in India and South Asia. Talking of political parties, Ambedkar said, "Will Indians place the country above their creed, or will they place creed above country? I do not know. But this much is certain, that if the parties place creed above country, our independence will be put in jeopardy a second time and probably be lost forever." There is a danger of democracy giving place to dictatorship. It is quite possible for this newborn democracy to retain its form, but give place to dictatorship in fact. If there is a landslide, the danger of the second possibility becoming an actuality is much greater. For in India, bhakti, or what may be called the path of devotion or hero worship, plays a part in its politics unequaled in magnitude by the part it plays in the politics of any other country in the world. Bhakti in religion may be a road to the salvation of the soul, but bhakti in politics or hero worship is a sure road to degradation and to eventual dictatorship. We must begin by acknowledging the fact that there is a complete absence of two things in Indian society, and one of those is equality. On the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Singh, for highlighting the issues and everything, your views and remarks on that. Now I will hand it over to the Purkho, our next co-host. Please, Purkho, proceed.
Thank you very much, Heman. Hello, I am Purkho Bheel, co-host of the webinar. Now I would like to invite the amazing speaker, Mr. Leslie Martin. He is Dalit Activist from Hyderabad, India. He was program coordinator on building child rights perspective and monitoring child rights violation of Dalit and Advocacy children. Advocacy with Children institution in 2017 to 2019. Currently, he is working an anchor on online survey for UNICEF on COVID-19 impact in bastis of Hyderabad, India. I am please welcome Mr. Leslie Martin. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Purkho. Greetings to you all. I'm happy to be here we are discussing an important thing of facing discrimination and bullying in social media. And thanks to the speakers so far that they have spoken very well and they have put the points very clearly into the picture. I see this as a result of the ongoing struggle between equality and minorities in the society. As their assertion is coming up, and also their bullying tactics in social media are coming up. So first of all, we have to be happy that there is an assertion by the minority communities in social media, as well as in the society, which is making the people who are showing discrimination and bullying a worry. That should be a kind of a state which they have to understand the assertion for equality and claiming equality by the minorities all over the world and in South Asia especially. And the changing tactics of the social media. Social media has, like Facebook and Twitter, have their own ways to curb the online bullying or online discrimination that is coming up in the social media. But we see a lot of hate speech is being circulated by the social media in public view. This is nothing but a kind of bullying against insecurities, because the more insecurity that you have, it shows clearly your mind. However, you are well educated, well institutionalized, well meritorious, or what can I say, liberal, or if you take the stand, if you don't take a stand against this bullying in social media, by being an influencer in social media, is negatively impacts you and makes you a lovable person, as far as my sense is concerned. And the recent phenomenon of the phenomenon attacks on Muslims and showing it in the social media very vehemently, the attacks on Dalits, the attacks on minorities, the attacks on Dalit journalists who are reporting the minority issues, the fundamental issues that are coming up in the social media are threatened by through social media only, or personally over the phones, personally sending direct messages to those journalists. So the mainstream journalists are now silent on those aspects. And if we take the scenario of journalists being killed for bringing the truth out across the world is very quite high, and especially among those or minorities are more. Those who are being killed, those who are being attacked publicly. So in this scenario, we have to be very, very assertive in our campaign, and it's because it's not for kind of a upper hand that we want to have over them. It's a kind of a human rights violations that we are bringing out, that which are making them of equality in nature, which are making them shiver through their spines. Even the governments are also following those lines, institutionally also following those lines, because so far we have not affected, we are very, very much minimally affected the change in the institutions of the governance systems. the governance systems calls for the participation of the minorities and people of marginalized sections into the fore, but still it is being done by the majoritarian groups, which have a high influence in the government sector, in the governing sector. So those ideas, those marginalized ideas, are not coming up in the forefront, and that's where we need to be address these kind of violations that are taking place as a group or as an institution. How do we monitor the institutions that are supposed to keep the secular bound of the countries or the constitutions of the different countries in South Asia, which co-opt for a secular states in giving security to the development and security to the minorities and minority communities and the other marginalized communities through constitutional provisions. That we need to check how we are going to address or check, have a mechanism of checklist where it is happening, how it is happening, and how we can prevent it, how we can bring awareness about it. For me, the most important thing is that we need to, I don't know, it's just a thought where we have done some experiments, some studies of bringing in vulnerabilities of the communities that are being marginalized or minorities in the in accessing government schemes or social schemes that are constitutionally provisioned schemes. So in that line, maybe we need to assess the vulnerability of social media, which is now becoming more and more aggressive in bullying and discriminating minority communities across South Asia. We need to map those kind of vulnerabilities that which we the person affected or the persons affected can individually or a group can come out with solutions, can act accordingly to the social media posts that are coming against them in Facebook or Twitter or this thing. I mean, this kind of a capacity building, we need to think, we need to draw a kind of this thing put into place, because we are going to deal with, we have dealt these things when the history was written by the majoritarian, and which marginalized communities did not get anything, minorities communities did not get anything. But now we are into that spectrum of writing and reading. So now we are in that kind of a space where we need to focus on how we can have checklist along the social media lines, which can break the silence which is happening for the governance and also for the society at large. With this, I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, for being in touch with the assertion of the minority communities and the problems they face in the social media. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your answer. Now we are moving towards concluding remarks by SARIM Convenor, Dr. Syed Khuram. So, Dr. Khuram, please.
Thank you, Purkho. It's a huge honor for me to be with such a knowledgeable panel. Professor Dr. Anila Malik, Mr. Mabrur Ahmed, Mr. Bikash Das, Mr. Anubhav Singh, and Mr. Leslie Martin. Your excellent thoughts and perspective are greatly appreciated. So first, I would like to highlight the important points presented by the distinguished speakers. Professor Anila mentioned that minorities in Pakistan have maximum rights as compared to any country in the world, and the government, along with its departments, are practically working to protect the lives, properties, and rights of minorities. She argued that minority rights are individual and collective rights through which people belonging to national minority groups are entitled to enjoy their own culture, to use their own language, to profess and practice their own religion, to have the right to freedom of expression and assembly, to have equal opportunities to education and employment, and to enjoy full participation in public life. Therefore, minority rights serve to bring all members of society to a balanced enjoyment of their human rights. And minorities require special measures to ensure that they benefit from the same rights as the rest of the population. According to Mr. Bikash, in Bangladesh, minority, which is 9% of the population, is facing physical and mental harassment. By mentioning recent incident of physical attack and lynching of Dalits, Mr. Bikash stated that Bangladesh minorities are living in terror and they are compelled to vote specific political parties, are intimidated and subjected to false propaganda via social media. Mr. Mabrur specified the persistent victimization of minorities in South Asia is a cycle of violence and never-ending discrimination with religious minorities. He believed that this victimization started when the subcontinent was under the rule of British. However, in post-colonial era, it continues and has built further. One of the reasons, according to Mr. Mabrur, is that the South Asian countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan are trying to build majoritarian state like West. And in South Asian countries, the establishment is majoritarian by considering religion as a base. Additionally, he said that whenever the states try to establish a majoritarian society, the minorities groups of the country suffer. According to Mr. Mabrur, unless we don't have even ground and common goal for prevailing peace in the world, the victimization will go on. He further said that for peace, we rely on public figure and well-known personalities, but we should provide the opportunity to common people who are the real victim to speak up for the victimization. Mr. Anubhav were of the view that the participation of people belonging to minorities in public affairs and in all aspects of political, economical, social, and cultural life of the country where they live is in fact essential to preserving their identity and fighting social exclusion. He further said that the protection of national minorities, rights and freedom for member of minorities are all part of international protection of human rights. In the words of Anubhav, the minority rights involve positive group specific measures, not just the non-discriminatory enforcement of universal human rights. Such minority rights may take the form of language rights, land claims, religious exemptions, guaranteed representation in legislative or advisory bodies, and various forms of territorial or cultural autonomy. Mr. Leslie expressed that because of the ongoing struggle for equality by the minority, bullying on social media and discrimination is rising day by day through different social media platforms. According to him, not only in South Asian region, but all over the world, minorities are facing inequality, discrimination, and bullying through social media. Through media like Facebook, Twitter, and other sites, the online bullying and discrimination is increasing every passing day. Mr. Leslie said, if we do not take a position against bullying and discrimination on social media, it would have a terrible influence on minorities' future. Now here I like to share my brief thoughts to conclude this session. Although South Asia has a vibrant media landscape, religious coverage is frequently restricted and mainly examined in the context of big political events. Journalists are routinely restricted by the governments and frequently targeted for their work by extremist and secularist organizations, prohibiting them from reporting on issues that impact religious minorities. Efforts to combat the tsunami of hatred and prejudice on social media appear to be mostly failing, as hate speech appear to be rising rather than decreasing. This is a crucial period for a South Asian minority in terms of advocacy. I think more regional actions and collaboration by states and civil society, as well as regional framework on minority rights, are urgently needed. SARIM is bringing together a group of journalists and digital influencers from around the world to shed light on the root causes of religious persecution. SARIM aspires to establish a long-term regional network committed to educating audiences about news viewpoint, the value diversity, and promote religious liberty. Because minorities make up the vast majority of online hate, it is critical that social media network priorities them in consulting to eradicate the hate speech. States must also defend the need of all minorities, not just a few. To safeguard minorities, social media companies must deliberately align their community standard with international human rights commitments. While some platforms have taken steps in this regard, others consistently appear to reject or misunderstand what international human rights norms require. So SARIM strongly recommend that states and social media corporations should establish a zero tolerance policy for hate speech, hate crime, and prejudice against minorities. A thorough investigation of hate speech and bigotry is also required. So a state must ensure that the internet and social media platforms provide a secure atmosphere in order to really guarantee freedom of speech and empowerment of members of national, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. Finally, on behalf of SARIM, I would like to express my gratitude to the panel for taking the time to share their perspective on the topic. that is of critical significance to the area. May God bless us all. Thank you.
I wanted to thank all great speakers from the bottom of my heart for taking time from your busy schedule. Your presence and words unify our cause in the best possible way. We appreciate your enlightening words that inspired us. Look forward to our next interaction soon. Best wishes. God bless you. Goodbye and Happy New Year to all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.